Until the new budget is passed, government services will continue to be funded under Section 29 of the Public Finance Management Act. Now, this is according to Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, and he addressed the media yesterday and also confirmed that National Treasury will retable the 2025 budget review on the 21st of May. Now, this follows the Western Cape High Court judgment for the reversal of the 0.5% value-added tax rate increase. The 2025 national budget was presented by the Finance Minister in March after it was first postponed from February. And to talk to us more about these latest developments and also what's likely to be cut in an effort to make up the 75 billion rand budget shortfall that the Minister outlined, we're joined now by Professor Alex van den Heever, who's Adjunct Professor at Wits School of Governance. Prof, good morning and thanks so much for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Good morning.
So it is hopefully third time lucky with this particular budget. It has to be, I would imagine, Prof. But looking at some of the areas, where do you think National Treasury will likely cut in an effort to make up for that 75 billion rand budget shortfall? We heard the Minister talk about the SARS collections and using some of that money to plug the shortfall, but where else could he look?
Well, I think he has to look at expenditure. So first of all, there is the issue of whether or not he's plugging a hole that VAT would have closed. There's a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not a VAT increase would have actually raised the revenue that was proposed, because it actually introduces incentives to evade and avoid paying the tax. So a lot of small businesses basically are the ones that will not actually comply with the VAT legislation. So that in itself and increasing tax rates don't necessarily raise the revenue that you always expect. So that's the first issue, is that we're actually looking at a budget where there's a hard ceiling, and that tax rates don't provide any relief for government in terms of its expenditure. So it has to look at cutting expenditure. So that has to be the focus. In my view, there should be a focus on addressing those areas of public expenditure that are not priorities. And these I don't see at the moment. I don't really see a vision coming through in the budget itself. A very defensive budget process. So in this, I think that we have to move over toward a more positive posture in the budget process, in that it is actually chasing some kind of strategic vision. And in that vision, it has to bring down government debt over time. And I don't really see that at this point in time. Every single target in terms of reducing government debt over the past 10 years has not been met. In every year, it has increased. So we have a real problem in government not being able to manage its finances effectively, and we have to get back into that situation.
So to the point that you make there, Prof, in terms of cutting that expenditure, but on areas that are not priority, which would those be? Given that, as you say, every year there's an increase in this budget. So which areas should not be prioritized?
Well, I think we have to look at the things that don't contribute toward economic growth and development. We have to protect those parts of the budget that are really important to social protection. We have to protect those areas that are important to enabling the economy to function. So infrastructure is important, but we pay a huge premium on infrastructure expenditure. It doesn't hit the ground. We are not seeing the infrastructure spend that we budget for actually changing things on the ground. So that is having a negative effect. We do have to emphasize it, but it also has to deliver. The productivity of expenditure has to change in terms of those parts of budget that impact on enabling the private sector to function. But social protection has to be protected and ring-fenced. But when you go through a budget the size of this, you can cut in many areas. It's not an overall slash. What you do is you look at those areas that are not part of a strategic vision and priority. The low-hanging fruit would be VIP protection services, the extra expenditure on politicians. If you had to look over the years at how much is now spent on members of the executive from around about 2000 to now, at provincial and national level and at municipal level, enormous amounts of money have gone in there. And what do we get for that? Very, very little. So in large part, it's used to actually protect political appointments. So then we've got to look at the productivity of expenditure. We have to look at whether or not we need so many people in senior government positions. If you go back to 1994, there was one Director General of National Health and Population Development at that stage, Department of Health. We have now changed it so that that was split into two departments, two Director Generals. There was only two Deputy Director Generals. There are now sort of 5 to 6 to 7 in the Department of Health, and an equivalent number in the Department of Social Development, in those two departments alone. So we've had this escalation, not necessarily just in the actual value of the salaries, but actually the quantum of people in senior government positions. And we're not getting any value for money out of that. And the same has happened in Treasury, the same has happened in other departments. We have a proliferation of people in senior management positions, many who shouldn't be there, but in many cases, the posts are not really delivering. So I think that we've seen this quiet escalation in the cost of the wage bill in the state that is not delivering. So I think that we have to look at changing the structure in many government departments and basically cutting fat in them. We basically are overspending on senior positions.
So these are systematic issues. And, Prof, to what you outlined now as low-hanging fruit, perhaps for cutting the budget, those in government, if you think about parties who've been in opposition and have complained about a bloated government, are now defending and justifying it, telling us that this is what the voters voted for. So if it's not going to happen from that end, how does South Africa and South African citizens put more pressure on government in order to force them to relook some of these expenditures?
So sort of a citizen's relationship to government priorities is very indirect. It doesn't happen that I specifically want that program to change or this program to change as a citizen and impact on government that way. It has to be that the party political process, our democracy, is used to place enormous pressure on government to get its act together. But it means that we've got to have a much more considered approach. One thing that's very good, I think, out of this process is people have scrutinized the budget much more than they have done in the past, and that there is a lot more political pressure on all the political parties to do their job in relation to the budget and not to get away with superficial responses. I think moving away from a situation where the budget process was essentially an undemocratic process where a Treasury basically just pushed a budget through. It went through cabinet because nobody would oppose it, and we had a single party pushing everything through. Now there's enormous opportunity to make the parties accountable, everybody, all of the parties, accountable for the nonsense they speak, for the failure to actually do proper analysis, all of those things. They've now got to basically look at changing the priorities of government to represent a vision. So this is the first year where there's been that scrutiny. Next year, there's a period now in which government basically has to prepare itself for this process. And it can't just come with a budget that it's going to push through. It's got to have spent a lot more time preparing people, showing what it's delivering, rather than just thrusting it upon the country with a budget speech, which is it's a bad approach. And I think we're moving into a different paradigm. But this paradigm, the way to get things done is to make the parties accountable. That is the only way in a democracy that you get anything done. And to get essentially the will of the people reflected, even though it's an indirect process, but to get it reflected in things that happen on the ground.
Well, Professor van den Heever, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your insights. Professor Alex van den Heever from the Wits School of Governance, talking to us about the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana's announcement that the revised 2025 national budget will now be retabled on the 21st of May 2025.